The U.S. has called on Ukraine to come back to the negotiating table for a critical minerals deal, which has been a sticking point in ties between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy.
Mr. Zelenskyy rejected the proposal last week, which would have seen the U.S. receiving 50% of Ukraine's critical minerals in repayment for wartime aid. A war of words has also worsened the widening rift between both leaders, with Mr. Trump labeling his Ukrainian counterpart a dictator without elections, and Mr. Zelenskyy retorting that Trump is living in a disinformation space.
Now, the alliance between both nations, once thought to be ironclad, has now seemingly unraveled in the previous few days. Now, all these come on the back of Ukraine's absence in U.S.-Russia peace talks in Saudi Arabia, as the war now inches closer towards its third-year mark. For more analysis, let's speak now with Matthew Orr. He's the Eurasia analyst at RAIN. Now, Matthew, given Mr. Trump's public engagement with Mr. Putin and rift widening between the U.S. and Ukraine, do you think it's time for Zelenskyy to consider a new approach, perhaps strike that mineral deal with the U.S.?
Yeah, I think you could definitely argue so, but I think that Zelenskyy, the reason he hasn't signed the deal and agreed to U.S. demands so far is that really it's still not something that he feels as necessarily in Ukraine's interest or even acceptable to the Ukrainian people. He's been very clear that he, in exchange, right, he's not opposed to the deal in any major way, other than that he wants security guarantees in exchange for a deal like this. And so he wants some sort of long-term buy-in from the U.S. that certainly the Trump administration and hopefully any future administration is going to have a long-term security relationship with Ukraine. And so that's what he really wants to see progress on before signing a document like that. And I think that the fact that, Special Envoy Kellogg didn't hold his press conference with Zelenskyy is a sign that there's really still outstanding disagreements on that very issue.
Okay. And Matthew, a number of European leaders reaffirmed their support for Mr. Zelenskyy after Mr. Trump accused him of being a dictator. We know the French president and UK prime minister are visiting Washington next week. Just how prepared and united do you think European countries are to step in and sustain their support for Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of the recent spat between Trump and Zelenskyy, the dictator comment, was not necessarily good for European unity. I think if anything, it really led to more divisions among the Europeans, led to a lot of doubts about whether the U.S. will actually really be able to support them in what they want to do if they want to move forward on increasing support to Ukraine. So it was not necessarily productive. I think that it's clear that the kind of the temperature in the room in Europe is changing. I think that support for some sort of European security mission in Ukraine is definitely rising. And so I think that we are definitely moving in that direction. But as far as we can tell right now, there really still are major divisions between the major countries, particularly a country like Germany should be leading on a mission like that. But we've yet to see, with the outcome of the German election still not clear, we're yet to understand what the German role will be. And so right now, there's still not a very clear, unified European position on the matter.
Matthew, President Trump says it's time to hold elections in Ukraine. The Economist has cited polls showing that even though Zelenskyy is still a popular politician, trust in him has dropped, and he would likely lose an election if one was called. What impact has Mr. Trump's ultimatums had on what Zelenskyy is facing domestically in Ukraine?
I mean, if anything, it's led to a rallying of support behind Zelenskyy. I think that even Ukrainians who did not necessarily vote for Zelenskyy, more than 5 years ago, now they've really rallied around him because they basically agree with President Zelensky's fundamental position, which is, again, this idea that Ukraine needs some sort of complex of measures that constitutes a really strong guarantee that Russia can't simply reignite or restart the war in a matter of years. And he's going to be supported in that. And so I think that we are definitely going to see a rise in President Zelensky's approval rating and support for him. And so he'll definitely try to use that to say, well, look, I mean, it's not my position that's really an obstruction with the United States. I think that the Ukrainian people support me in this position. But that being said, even if support for Zelensky is on the rise, I don't necessarily think that that the American side will drop its kind of criticism and demands among Zelensky, because it's clear that the Russians are very much pushing this topic in their bilateral contacts with the United States, with American officials. And so I think that it's clear that this topic is not going anywhere. But for now, I would say that Zelensky's position is definitely still secure.
Mm-hmm. At least one former diplomat has said on record that President Trump has never liked Zelensky, wants to get rid of Zelensky. What's your assessment? Why has Mr. Trump moved so quickly against the Ukrainian president?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there could be a lot of things going on here. I think that one is simply a strategic calculation by the Trump administration. They're very much interested in the spheres of influence idea in U.S. foreign policy. They want to redirect U.S. foreign policy more towards Asia, actually. And so there's very much this idea that we actually need to try this so-called reverse Kissinger idea and really try to create space between the Russians and the Chinese. That is the evidence of that is that at these talks in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. didn't just limit the conversation to the Russia-Ukraine war and ending that. It was very outspoken about how it foresees, restored U.S.-Russia contacts, even economic cooperation, again, which would all kind of presuppose an idea like that. But even, I think, getting to your question, I think the two have a long history that's important to remember. I mean, you'll remember that Zelensky played a key role in Trump's first impeachment hearing in the United States. And so that still is kind of a wound that's sitting there. And then, of course, the final one is that I think Trump could very easily believe that if the Russians are very insistent on this demand of political change in Ukraine, elections in Ukraine, Zelensky must go, then it becomes very clear that Trump sees Zelensky as an obstacle for his goal for a deal. And so it becomes very easy to essentially make Zelensky into a scapegoat, right? Particularly if a deal is not achieved or if a deal falls through. He doesn't want the United States or himself to be to blame for that failure, right? To blame for a lack of leverage in the situation. It would be much more comfortable to have, President Zelensky be the one who's being obstinate or something like that. So I think that there's a lot of factors that are going to lead to a continuation of these Trump-Zelensky tensions. But I think that there is a possibility that this might be kind of a somewhat temporary period or a particularly sharp period. And then who knows, maybe in a few weeks, we could see kind of at least the tone, the very kind of acerbic tone of these attacks die down somewhat as both sides realize that this public spat is actually not helping their common goal of achieving a deal.
Okay, Matthew, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your time and your insight this morning. Matthew Orr, Eurasia analyst at RANE.